Subscribe before the truth disappears. The sirens found the house before anyone could say what was burning. Red and white splashed across the stucco and the citrus trees, smoke pumping out of the eaves in dark, greasy breaths. Firefighters hit the front door with a halogen, a hiss of superheated air rushing past them like a living thing. Neighbors gathered in pajamas and coats, arms folded against a cold California morning that felt colder for the smell of plastic and paint going soft in flame. He arrived with 2 boys in the back seat and the story already formed. Baseball bags slumped open beside a rolled-up chain-link backstop. "I took them to practice," he said to the first uniform who came close. "We came back and—" He let the last part die on the sirens. In the wash of emergency lights, the ordinary details stood out. The boys wore matching caps, their shoelaces still tucked into cleats so they wouldn't clack on asphalt. On the roof, Christmas lights no one had bothered to pull down in January lit up one more time as a line shorted and popped, then went dark forever. Inside, somewhere past the living room photos and the white couch and the little blue ceramic bowl where she kept her keys, a smoke alarm chirped its last, then fell silent, battery boiled to nothing. Dr. Irene Gaw-Lai had not come outside. Detective Lena Whitaker got there after the second hose line, when steam replaced smoke and the air turned metallic. She watched the fire crew move with a tired grace born of repetition, a shoulder against a door, a gloved hand pushing a couch aside with a grunt, helmets bobbing like buoys in the dim. Arson investigator Emilio Cortez, all crow's feet and knees that hated stairs, slid past her with the deliberate tread of a man counting his steps. Lena glanced at the husband, the way he bent at the waist, hands on his knees, then straightened to watch the house with a forced patience. The boys sat on the curb under a blanket someone produced from nowhere, eyes wide, mitts held like small shields. A neighbor wrapped in a cardigan laid a hand on one boy's shoulder and mouthed something that never reached sound. "Utilities are off?" Lena asked the first firefighter who came out, steam rolling off his turnout. He shrugged under his gear. It was too early to say. "Electrical, maybe." "Space heater?" one of them guessed without guessing. The house surrendered the way houses do, by degrees. Heat peeled paint from the hallway walls and blistered family photos until smiles became white ovals. In the kitchen, a pot lid fused to the ceramic stovetop. In the bedroom at the end of the hall, where smoke had banked low and lingered longest, they found her. The blanket over her shoulders was half melted to the carpet. She had made it as far as the doorway. Lena's pen stilled, the ordinary weight of the moment settling where it always did, in the space behind the breastbone. Cortez knelt and said very little, which was how Lena knew he was thinking the most. He sniffed at the floor. He leaned close to the baseboards. He ran a gloved finger along a rippling, L-shaped burn on the stair and looked at the black on his glove like a jeweler appraising a stone. Outside again, the husband stared at the holes the fire had cut in his house and told the story again, this time with the stiff precision of a man laying out his axes. He'd driven the boys to practice. The coach could confirm. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter. He had come back when Irene didn't answer. He had seen smoke. He had called 911 from the car. He tried to go in. Look, his forearms are reddened where the heat had found him, until the flames pushed him back. Lena looked past him at the boys. The older one watched her while pretending not to. She crouched, eye level. "What position do you play?" she asked, like they were in a park and not standing in the ruins of everything. He said shortstop, then looked at his shoes. "What field?" Lena asked the husband. "Which park?" He gave the name of a complex 2 miles away. "We were early. I warmed them up myself." "Okay," Lena said. "We'll need the coach's name. Anyone else you saw there?" He blinked, measuring, then shook his head. "No, it was quiet. It's Saturday. People sleep in." On the way back to her car, Lena looked at the neighbor with the cardigan who had materialized again, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking. "You see them leave?" Her eyes flicked to the boys. "I saw her last night," she said softly. "She waved from the mailbox. I didn't see this morning. We sleep late on weekends." Cortez rolled his shoulder as he came up beside Lena. "Stairs are interesting," he said. "How interesting?" Hot as hell, but burn patterns don't make friends with gravity like that unless somebody helped them. I'll reserve the word accelerant until I'm not standing in front of the widower." Lena nodded. The smoke had an oily bite. The kitchen's smoke alarm housing was melted into a tear that had drooled down the wall. Its battery, when they found it later in a black puddle, showed an expiration date from last year. The thermostat was off the wall entirely, its wiring yanked. Two sets of facts lay down side by side and pretended not to know each other. At the park, hours later, the infield was a frozen pool of light. Lena walked the empty diamond, cleat marks stitched across the dirt like a diagram. The chain-link fence sang quietly in the wind. In the lot, a camera peered down from a pole. She made the call and waited in her car with the heater spitting tepid air while a city tech yawning through a weekend shift scraped the drive and pushed video to her phone. On the screen, a father and two boys pulled into a space near the batting cages. The van's clock, if it could be trusted, read 8:01. The boys tumbled out, one holding his cap to keep it on in the wind. The father opened the rear, pulled out a bucket of balls, then checked his phone. At 8:10, he closed the hatch. At 8:12, he looked at his phone again. At 8:20, all three climbed back in. The van's reverse lights glowed at 8:21, brake lights at 8:22, the vehicle out at 8:23. Lena scrubbed back and forth, noting timestamps, counting breaths. She called dispatch. "Confirm initial 911 call time on the house fire, down to the second." 8:29 and 13 seconds, came the answer. Okay, Lena thought. Possible, barely. She pictured the van at stoplights, the left turn arrow at Lake and 14th that lasted 3 blinks and punished hesitation, the slower approach to a neighborhood thick with Saturday dog walkers. Tight, but not impossible. The narrative still held. By noon she had the coach, a man with thawing coffee in a paper cup and a voice you could hear from center field. He shook his head before she finished asking. Practice wasn't scheduled. Weather hadn't been a factor. It was California for God's sake, but there was a league meeting. He had sent a note in the parent group to skip the morning. Maybe he didn't read it, the coach said, pity and something else crossing his face. What time did you message? Lena asked. Last night at 9:30. I can show you. The parent group was a dozen bubbles and a river of thumbs up, the coach's note riding the top. No practice tomorrow. See you all Monday. No one in the thread had asked for clarification. The husband's number sat mutely among the list of recipients. By late afternoon, the house was a carcass, cooled to autopsy. Cortez emerged with jars and swabs and one sharp, satisfied nod. Stairs, he said again, and the master. Big splash there. Stove is clean, nothing on the wiring I can see with my tired eyes. I'll get the lab to use their smarter ones. Lena had the boys in a soft interview room at the station. A female victim advocate put warm cocoa in front of them. The older boy talked about batting cages and how the tokens always fell through the slot unless you put them in with the eagle up. The younger boy said he'd forgotten his glove and then not forgotten all after all. They both said practice. They both looked at the door like it might supply an adult who could end the questions with authority and a ride home. At her desk, Lena opened the husband's call detail records. She knew what she needed and where it would hide, the stutters of human routine. The morning was a chain of very human mistakes. At 7:47, a text to the coach's number that never sent. No service? At 7:49, a retry, sitting there unsent too. At 8:05 and again at 8:12, his phone pinged a tower that served the park. That checked out with the video. Back at the house, dispatch fixed the first 911 at 8:29 and 13 seconds, also in the record. Then a cluster of missed calls from neighbors, friends, an unknown number. Shock had a signature even in metadata. She blew out a breath and stood stretching when the email arrived from records, subject line bland as a spreadsheet. Neighbor 911 recordings supplemental. She clicked and heard the thing that would lodge in her brain like a sliver. Before the husband's 8:29 call, by 4 minutes, a 911 hang-up registered to the Gaw-Lai landline. No one had answered the call back. It could have been a glitch, a wire sagging, heat doing strange things to copper. It could have been anything until the next attachment opened and the audio bled into her office like smoke. 4 seconds only, captured because the system records its own rings. On the second ring, somewhere distant, a familiar two-tone chirp cut through. High-low, high-low. She had heard it in the kitchen that morning. Cortez had too, before the plastic sagged and darkened. The model's chirp was unmistakable, a manufacturer's signature. Then faintly, as though through a wall, a man's voice, close to the receiver, saying, "Now."
Lena froze the waveform, pulled the timestamp, stared at the digits until they stopped being numbers and started being a shape. The hang-up call came in at 8:25:02, 4 minutes before his 911, 7 minutes after he'd left the park. The system logged the call source as the house landline. She dialed the coach's number from her notes and waited while it rang. A woman's voice answered, his wife, killing time in a grocery line. "He's not here," she said. Then, "Hold on." Shuffling. "He left his phone with me at breakfast by accident," she added, apologetic. "He doesn't remember anything without me, poor thing." "What time was breakfast?" Lena asked, voice even. 8:30. "And he didn't have his phone at 8:30? "No. I texted him about it. He came back for it, but later." The phone in Lena's hand felt suddenly heavier. She thanked the woman, ended the call, and stared at the 2 times sitting side by side like mismatched bookends. One phone call had rung inside a burning house before anyone was supposed to know it was burning. Somewhere between the field and the first siren, the Alibi had picked up a splinter it couldn't hide. She pulled the landline carrier's record again, this time drilling down to the routing notes the system keeps in case of storms and downed lines. At the bottom, a detail no one bothered to read unless they were looking for a splinter, was a line that made her scalp prickle. Call origin, cordless base set to auto-dial recent. A second line, right under it, last dialed number, coach's mobile. Lena picked up the handset again, already dialing the husband's number, already hearing the shape of the question as it would sound in the interview room. It rang once, twice, and then there was a click, and a third voice, recorded long ago and saved by inertia, spilled gentle and honeyed into her ear from the coach's voicemail. "Hey, it's Coach. Leave it after the beep." Then a beep, and beneath it, the breadcrumb. 2 soft chirps from a smoke alarm no one had ever thought to replace. The message the system had saved was timestamped 8:25 a.m. The background, when she boosted the gain and listened again, had the hollow flicker of a room not yet filled with flame, of a house holding its breath. When she finally looked up from the screen, the room felt smaller, the light thinner. She stood, grabbed her coat, and headed for the interview room, where the boys stared into their cocoa, and the man who said he'd been at practice rubbed his knuckles like the heat still stung. "Sir?" Lena said, at the door, voice steady, pulse not. "We need to talk about a call you made at 8:25.
Detective Lena Whitaker watched the husband's hands more than his face. Hands betray what the mouth edits. When she mentioned the call at 8:25, his fingers twitched like he'd touched something hot. Then the mask came on, the confusion, the wounded disbelief. I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "That must be a mistake. I told you, I was at the park." He folded his arms, not a defensive cross, tighter, like he was physically holding his story together. Lena nodded slowly, not pushing, not yet. "We pulled the call log from your landline," she said. "Someone dialed your coach's number 4 minutes before you called 911. He blinked, eyes darting. "That's impossible. The phone was in the kitchen." "It was," Lena said. "Cordless base, voice-activated redial. Ring a bell?" His lips parted, but no sound came. Lena leaned back, letting silence do what confrontation couldn't. Silence was a solvent. It stripped lies bare. Outside the observation window, Detective knew and gave a small nod. He'd been with the department 15 years and knew when a suspect's story started rotting from the inside. Finally, the husband exhaled. "Maybe Irene called the coach. Maybe she wanted to ask about practice." "Right before the fire?" Lena said. He hesitated. I don't know, maybe. In the evidence room, Cortez had his findings lined up like dominoes. A clear jar half full of ash sat beside a folded report. He tapped the paper with a gloved finger. Accelerant confirmed, he said. Ethyl-based. Poured along the staircase and master doorway. Someone knew where to start a burn. Lena skimmed the results. Could Irene have started it? Doubt it, Cortez said. The pattern's deliberate. This wasn't panic or accident. It's geometry. He glanced toward the glass where the husband sat under fluorescent light, still motionless. He's got the look, Cortez muttered. The I didn't mean for it to go this far look. Lena didn't answer. She'd seen that look in too many interviews, men who had built their own disasters one excuse at a time. By noon, the detectives were deep in data. Phone records, surveillance, bank transactions. The story of that morning began to fracture under the weight of its own details. At 7:58 a.m., the husband's phone connected to the home Wi-Fi, meaning it was still inside the house. At 8:03, it jumped to cell tower range, likely in the car. At 8:25, the landline dialed out. At 8:29, the 911 call came in from his cell. But between those two times, those damning 4 minutes, the line to the house was alive. Lena leaned over Nguyen's monitor. Pulled the voicemail again, she said. The faint background noise whispered through the speakers, a man's voice saying, now, then two chirps from a smoke alarm, but this time Nguyen filtered the low-end static. Behind the word now, another sound surfaced, subtle, rhythmic. Cortez frowned. That's not fire, he said. That's a garage door motor. Lena's pulse jumped. The garage was detached, she said. He said he parked outside because of the clutter. Nguyen scrubbed the audio back. If that sound is the opener, he said, he was still there. The silence in the room thickened. Then Cortez broke it, voice gravelly. You ever see a man stage his own discovery? They panic when the script doesn't match the clock. At 4 p.m., they got the footage. The neighbor across the street, an elderly woman with a doorbell camera she barely used, had unknowingly caught it all. At 8:18, the husband's SUV pulled into the driveway, brake lights glowing through the haze. At 8:21, smoke began to rise from the kitchen window. At 8:24, the SUV reversed out and rolled to the curb, idling for nearly 3 minutes. Then the 911 call came in. He waited, watched, then dialed. Lena's hand tightened around the mouse. Get this to the DA, she said. When they brought him back into the room that evening, he didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked for his sons. They're with your sister, Lena said softly. They're safe. He stared down at his hands, the same hands that had signed for the insurance policy, that had filled out the league registration forms, that had poured a trail of fire up a staircase. His shoulders sagged like the gravity in the room had tripled. It was supposed to look like an accident, he murmured. The kitchen, the outlet. I wasn't supposed to be there. Lena said nothing. The recorder clicked softly in the corner. I went back for my wallet, he said, voice trembling. She was still in bed. I told her I'd be gone 10 minutes. Did she know? Lena asked. He shook his head. She thought I was just... He stopped. It wasn't supposed to... I didn't mean for the fire to spread. Cortez's report sat on the table, unread by him, the word accelerant bolded twice. There was no accidental spread. Hours later, when the confession had been signed and the tape labeled, Lena stepped outside the precinct. The sky was dimming, pink bleeding into the Pacific haze. The smell of ash still clung to her clothes. Nguyen leaned against the hood of a cruiser. You ever get used to it? He asked. Lena looked at the horizon, the sun dipping behind the palms. No, she said. You just learn when to stop breathing it in. He nodded, silent for a while. Then, you think she tried to call for help? Lena thought of the chirping alarm, the faint now on the tape, the landline's blinking redial button. I think she tried, and the system caught her last second alive. The two detectives stood in the fading light, listening to the low hum of the city. Somewhere behind them, a phone on a desk began to ring. Once, twice, then stopped. But the case wasn't done. 2 days later, as evidence techs sifted through the ruins of the Gaw-Lai home,
One of them found a scorched flash drive wedged behind the baseboard near the master closet. On its melted label, Insurance Policy Update. When the data forensics team finally cracked it open, it wasn't insurance paperwork at all. It was an email draft, never sent, written by Irene Gaw-Lai, time-stamped 5:12 a.m., January 6th. If anything happens to me, please make sure the boys stay with my sister. He's not who he says he is. Lena read the words 3 times before saying anything. It wasn't the alibi that cracked first. It was the marriage.
The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and recycled air. It had been 8 months since the fire, but the story of the morning of January 6 hadn't cooled. Reporters filled the back rows, pens tapping in rhythm with the ticking courtroom clock. The husband sat between 2 attorneys, his hands folded too neatly, like someone still rehearsing calm. Detective Lena Whitaker took the stand. The prosecutor's voice was steady. "Detective Whitaker, can you summarize what you found regarding the defendant's alibi?" She nodded once. "He stated that he was at his son's baseball practice when the fire started. He said he left the house around 8 o'clock, returned shortly after 8:30, and discovered it burning." "And was that true?" "No." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Lena continued, her tone even. "We obtained footage showing the defendant's car pulling into the driveway at 8:18 a.m. The fire was visible in the kitchen window at 8:21. He waited until 8:29 before calling 911. The defense attorney rose. "Detective, isn't it possible that the clock on that footage was inaccurate?" "It's possible," Lena said. "But the neighbor's doorbell camera, the fire department logs, and the cell tower timestamps all align within seconds. The pattern is consistent." The attorney frowned. "So your conclusion, based on technology, not witnesses, is that he set this fire?" Lena met his eyes. "My conclusion is based on what he couldn't explain." She looked toward the jury. "A phone call was made from the house at 8:25 a.m. The only person who could have made it was inside the home, alive. It dialed his coach's number, not emergency services, and that call captured his voice." Her words landed like a dropped weight. After court recessed, Lena found herself standing in the hallway outside the evidence room again, the same hallway where it had all started. Nguyen leaned against the wall, coffee in hand. "The DA's playing it clean. They're leading with the phone call, holding the accelerant report for the middle punch." "Smart," Lena said. "You don't start with the fire. You start with the lie." Nguyen gave a dry chuckle. "That should be our department motto." She smiled faintly, but didn't answer. Her eyes were on the display monitor inside the evidence room, the paused voicemail waveform, still glowing faintly on the screen. The sound had haunted her. That faint "now." The chirping alarm, the whir of the garage door. It wasn't just evidence. It was a moment caught between intent and consequence, the second before everything unravels. During cross-examination, the defense tried one more angle: grief. They painted him as a husband who'd made mistakes, who'd panicked. They said he poured gasoline to help the fire burn cleaner, thinking it would mask the scene of an accidental spark. But then the prosecutor brought up Irene's flash drive. The letter appeared on screen, pixelated but legible. "If anything happens to me, please make sure the boys stay with my sister. He's not who he says he is." The jury didn't look at him after that. They looked at her, at Irene. After sentencing, when the cameras were gone, Lena sat in her car outside the courthouse and turned the ignition without starting it. Rain tapped on the windshield, soft, persistent, unending. Nguyen opened the passenger door.
"He took the deal," he said. "Life without parole. No retrial." Lena nodded. "The boys?" "With her sister, somewhere near San Diego." They sat in silence, the rain thickening to mist. Nguyen sipped from his coffee. "You ever think about what breaks first?" Lena frowned. "What do you mean?" "In cases like this, it's never the murder that breaks the lie. It's something smaller. One call, 1 second of audio, one word you can't unsay." She thought about it. The word now. The sound of the smoke alarm. The phone ringing before anyone knew to be afraid. "It's always the small things," she said. That night, Lena went back to her desk to finish the report. The precinct was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. She attached the final audio file to the case record and scrolled through the transcripts. Exhibit 14A, landline audio, 8:25 a.m. Her cursor hovered over play. The sound began again, faint, static-filled. The chirp, the motor hum, the single word, but then something new caught her ear. Something she'd never noticed under the layers of compression and panic. Right after the word now, there was a faint intake of breath, then another voice, a whisper, almost imperceptible but there. She boosted the gain, filtering the background noise. The voice, barely audible, came through, "You don't have to." She froze. The waveform trembled, the sound playing once more. The voice wasn't his. It was hers. Irene's. For a moment, the weight of the case, the months of evidence, the coldness of procedure, all of it collapsed into that single instant. It wasn't just murder. It was mercy refused. Lena leaned back, the room tilting slightly. Outside, the rain intensified, streaking the window in crooked lines of light. She shut the laptop, the sound still echoing in her head like a heartbeat that refused to die. 3 days later, the fire department finished its full report. In the final line, beneath burn patterns and chemical charts, one note stood out. Primary ignition point located near stairwell. Secondary heat source consistent with lighter fluid residue traced to kitchen countertop. But below it was scrawled in Cortez's unmistakable handwriting, a quiet footnote. No fingerprints found on ignition device. Handle wiped. Someone else touched it last. Lena reread the line, then looked at the photograph of the melted kitchen counter, Irene's handwriting on the flash drive label. The story had always been about an alibi that fell apart. Now, she wasn't sure whose. As she left the station that night, she passed by the evidence locker one last time. The red evidence tags hung in neat rows. In the silence, the thought hit her like static. Maybe Irene had lit that first spark. Not to die, but to leave something that couldn't be denied. The truth wasn't always found in who lied. Sometimes, it was in who stayed silent. And in the end, that silence spoke louder than fire. They said the truth burned with her. Lena murmured under her breath, stepping into the cold night. But sometimes, it burns through whoever tries to hide it. If you thought this one was wild, wait for the next. Hit subscribe before the truth disappears.